Welcome, adventurers. Today on Rebel Then King, I am continuing building up parties using only one class, and this begins what I would call the by popular demand series here. We've done about half a dozen class builds so far, and there have definitely been a few classes that keep popping up in the comments. So we're going to take a look at those, starting with Rogues. Now, this is a class that, frankly, I know and I always knew would work well if it was the only class that you are using in your party. Why? Because each different racket or subclass of Rogue does allow you to change your key ability score. So right out of the gate, you have the ability to overcome a huge problem that a lot of other classes have if you're if you're using them exclusively in your adventuring party, in the sense that you are not stuck with one key ability score. And then they have all the skill training and extra skill feats, so you are going to have skills covered quite easily. And then also, they're a pretty decent martial class. There are still going to be some things that are lacking, so we'll go over that. But overall, this party, I think, is going to work out quite well. Let's take a look at some of the individual builds, starting where I always start with the hammer, the upfront damage. I am beginning to use this ancestry quite a lot, the Colo. I think someone mentioned it would be cool to see which ancestries I use for which positions, and the Colo is one I am using quite a lot overall, I've noticed. I have chosen a Colo with a Junker background. The class is Rogue, of course, and this is going to be my Ruffian Racket Rogue. Why Ruffian Racket for the hammer? Well, it's because the Ruffian Racket allows you to do multiple things that the other classes don't, starting with use Strength as your key ability score. So, this allows you to be a full damage dealer, adding +4 damage to your strikes. Additionally, you are trained in medium armor with this racket, so you don't have to worry about, having high strength but then not having a lot of dex and therefore having a low armor class. Nope, still a full 18 AC. It's wonderful. And then we will also talk about a few other things that you can do with your weapons, starting with the fact that you have more weapons available to you to use with sneak attack using the Ruffian Racket, so it does open you up to using a greater variety of heavier hitting weapons compared to the other rackets. All good things for the upfront hammer build. Now, as far as the ability scores with this build, I went full strength, a little bit of dex just to keep that armor class up, a little bit of con because you were frontline, a little bit of intelligence because we are rogues and we want a lot of skills. And then this does have a +2 charisma because I picked up a couple of good feats that go with charisma. As far as a few other things that we get out of the heritage and ancestry here, the Great Colo it's sort of the big tough Colo. So we're getting extra hit points out of that. And then Pack Hunter we'll talk about again in a little bit. Let's take a look at the weapons here. I went with a flail. I believe, so that's a D6 +4 bludgeoning, and it also has the trip trait on it, which is cool. And disarm and sweep, if you're choosing to disarm, I suppose. For the defenses, since we do have the ability to wear medium armor, I went with the breastplate to maximize that armor class. No spells. Let's get back to details. Let's talk about what this will do in damage. Well, you're going to knock people down in multiple ways, actually. The flail does have the trip trait, and the Great Colo heritage gives us a bonus to trip. This will be even better at later levels when you can add runes to your weapon and use those potency runes for those athletics checks. And then also remember, this is part of the Ruffian Racket. If you land a crit on an off-guard creature, that you get access to the critical specialization effect of that weapon. That is a cool, I think, overlooked thing as part of the Ruffian Racket. This means using the flail, the critical specialization is knocking people down. So if a creature's off guard to you and you critically hit it, you are going to knock it down with this build. So you're kind of your own anvil in a way too, which is fantastic. And then on the note of the anvil and other characters can help you out because you have Pack Hunter. You were taught how to hunt as part of a pack. You gain a +2 circumstance bonus to checks to aid, and your allies gain a +2 circumstance bonus to checks to aid you. So it is easier to be aided as this upfront build, which means that your other characters should be taking extra actions to aid you quite often, especially knowing that, again, if you crit, you knock something down. Other things you can do, well, you can demoralize with this decent charisma, and then I did give this build You're Next as a reaction and Intimidating Glare as the general the skill feat. Those go hand in hand. And then out of combat, you can be a little bit of a face, although we do have a slightly more dedicated, actually kind of a lot more dedicated ambassador in the build. And then you do have Hefty Hauler from the Junker background. So overall, not the hardest of hitters with only a D6 weapon, but being able to use that critical specialization effect on off-guard targets, being a creature that is easy to receive aid from others, this should work out quite well. Let's go take a look at the 2 anvil builds now, because to me, Rogue this is the position that Rogue typically plays, is the anvil. They're not the hardest of hitters, so they don't make the greatest hammers. And they're, of course, great professionals. They do that as well. But they're decent in this anvil position because, well, they sort of doubly benefit from getting in flanking positions, of course. Like, the anvil should be setting up flanks for the hammer, but then also, as a rogue, that's double great because in this party of rogues, if you get a creature in a flanking position, well, then both of those, you and your ally, are both dealing your sneak attack damage, which is fantastic. So this is a goblin, bandit background, rogue, of course. It is Unbreakable Goblin. I am kind of indexing on the toughness heritages here. And then for the ancestry feat, I went with Goblin Scuttle. This is a reaction. An ally ends a move adjacent to you. You take advantage of your ally's movement to adjust your position. You step. The reason I did this is because in the anvil position, you want to interact with your teammates a lot, especially when setting up flanks. So just imagine a situation where one of your allies can't quite get around a creature, can't quite get into a flank, but they can land next to you, and then you might be able to take that step to set up a flank. So that's what that is there for. This is using the Scoundrel Racket. Now, with the Scoundrel Racket, you can be charisma based. So that is why I have a +3 charisma for this build. I did go with a full +4 dex and +1 strength and a +1 con, again, to help out in the front line. Now, with the Scoundrel Racket, it's sort of all about feinting. So I took the class feat Overextending Feint. You goad a foe into overextending. On a successful feint, you can use the following success and critical success effects instead of any other effects that would occur when you feint. So the critical success, the target takes a -2 circumstance penalty to all attack rolls against you before the end of its next turn. And success is same, but it's only on the next roll. So if a creature's already off guard to you, you don't need to feint, right? Like if you're in a flank. But you could still do this and then punish that creature's attacks against you and stay in the pocket, stay in that front line. Because that is another thing about sort of anvil positions is sometimes as an anvil, you can kite in and kite out, but usually you kind of need to stick there and you're usually a little less tough than the hammer. So the anvil can be kind of a dangerous position, but this feat helps out. And then the skill feat, I went with Group Impression because you are charisma based. This is sort of playing the ambassador role. You also got Group Coercion from your background. As far as the weapons here, classic, bandit, rogue, rapier. I mean, classic. And then studded leather armor. And that's really all there is to this one. Now on to the next anvil, because there are 2 anvils, and this one is the Healer Anvil. It is a Tengu Barber background, and I went with the Thief Racket, the classic racket for rogues, full dex build, applying dexterity to damage instead of strength. And this is something I'm excited about with this build. I'm just going to jump right to it. Skill feat, battle medicine. So remember, in this series, I'm trying to build a party of rogues without field medic background, without extra human abilities like general training, without cheesing other ancestry abilities, get the most out of the class itself. Because the rogue gives you feats, you can pick up battle medicine at level 1. I think there's only one other class that lets you do this. You all know what it is. But this is fantastic. In a lot of these single class builds, I have struggled for medicine, especially in combat medicine, but here we go. So not surprisingly, I have maxed out dex, but wisdom is my secondary. I probably don't need any strength now that I think of it, because of the whole dex applies to damage. So maybe I would put that to intelligence instead and get some more training, I guess, maybe. This is a great racket. It's a great subclass. It is one of the only truly single attribute dependent builds in the system. A lot of builds, it's not the only one, but it's often kind of tough to split your ability scores where you need. And with the Thief Racket, it's just dex, because that increases your accuracy and your damage. That's it. Dexterity. Done. And then this is why it frees you up to have a good +3 wisdom for that medicine training. So in combat, you're going to set people up with flanking. That's what this party is going to do a lot of. You can set yourself up with tumble behind. You can use, I actually am using the beak that the Tengu has as your main weapon here, because the sneak attack does apply to that. And then I went with the Dogtooth Tengu Heritage, because your beak unarmed attack gains the deadly D8 trait. So, hey, if you have a good crit, you're doing extra damage with that Dogtooth Tengu Heritage. I went with Storm's Lash, which does give you access to a spell. And I don't want Electric Arc. I didn't think I chose Electric Arc. I want Stabilize. This is, in case you've already battle medicine someone, you can't again. It's kind of nice to stabilize people so you don't have to worry about them dying in combat. I think the only other thing to go over here is the defenses, just classic leather armor because of your full dexterity. That's all you need. Now, onto the last build, the Professional Cannon Rogue. Rogues make pretty decent cannons, and this one certainly is no exception. I went with a halfling. It's a detective. It's a rogue. It is, of course, taking Titan Slinger. That's why I went with a halfling for this. And, of course, because of that, it is armed with a halfling sling staff, of course. I gave it a dagger, too, so that you have some melee options. And then the defenses here, it is using leather armor. Now, this is using the Mastermind Racket, which allows you to use intelligence as your key ability score. That's why we are maxed out on intelligence, and then secondary max on dexterity so that you have accuracy for your strikes. Why this racket for cannon? Well, the Mastermind allows you to recall knowledge, and as an effect of that, leave a creature off guard. This means that from range, of course, you can recall knowledge, and now that creature is off guard to your ranged attacks, allowing you to deal sneak attack damage from range. The other rackets don't give you any range sort of ability like that, and that's why this is going to make an excellent cannon. I mean, dealing a D10, that's already a pretty decent ranged attack. But then if you get to add a D6 sneak attack to it, and then this is also propulsive, which we're not making use of right now because, halflings have a strength penalty, and, I think I just offset that to, boosted strength to get it back to 0. But maybe eventually you boost your strength and you can make use of that propulsive trait to add a little bit more damage even. So in combat, you want to recall knowledge right away. And that's what you want to do anyway. Figure out what you're doing before you do it. But extra benefit here, if you recall knowledge successful, well, then you get to do some off-guard slinging, and you get to deal some extra damage and contribute, frankly, a lot more than a lot of ranged builds will be able to do. I would say later on, you might want to also pick up battle medicine because you've got some decent wisdom, and it helps to have additional people who are able to do that. And then this is the professional build. It is trained in all but one skill. That is nuts. All but one. And then because this is intelligence-based, you have the crafting, the arcana, the society, all of those intelligence things. And then due to background and heritage, we've got observant halfling. We have trap finder, glean content as a skill feat, class feat as trap finder, and then we have streetwise from our background. So just a ton of exploration boosts. All right, onto the party overall. The good things about the party. I mean, you have all the skills in spades, in redundancies, multiple redundancies. I think you have all the combat positions. At least the damage ones. You don't really, you do have some support, and remember that hammer build that has a bonus to aid and to receive aid, and that hammer that can trip, and then you have the ambassador anvil who can feint. Also, we've got some demoralizing in there. So, there's support, but there's not buffing. And there is battle medicine, but out of that, there's not really much healing. So, still pretty decent. I think you're going to be fine in combat. And then I would say that the other, let's see, what else is good? It's just mix of ability scores is another one, right? You've got all the ability scores covered, and that is fantastic. The bad, it's lesser healing, I would say, right? Lesser healing potion. You just don't have maybe quite enough. I would like a little bit more, but it's going to be fine. Also, you got to point out, it's all precision damage. So if you go up against something that is immune to precision damage, which you will, this party is not going to be stacking on extra bits of damage at all. And then if you combine a possible resistance to damage, like resistance to piercing damage, then this party will struggle for sure. That's why I always still recommend having a mixture of classes. But if you are only using one class to build out your party, the rogue is a pretty good option.